So one of the biggest topics surrounding Anthem for the past few days has been the loot system, and when I say the biggest, I mean the most controversial, with many folks expressing their frustration towards the lack of meaningful loot, nerfed item drops, and even more so, a lack of a response on the topic from Bioware. Well, it seems that Bioware's response did in fact come in yesterday, so we're going to go over that in just a bit, but for those out of the loop with what's currently happening, last Friday there was an alleged 10-hour window in which the loot drops from all of the encounters in the game were accidentally bumped up to some very high levels, to the point that masterwork and even legendary items became a more common occurrence. After Bioware came in and announced that there was actually an unintended consequence of some patch they just brought in, well, people just went up in their arms about it, and this is basically where we're currently at, which is funny because the game was out for a whole week prior to that in the early access, and nobody ever said anything about any loot drops, as they were pretty much on par with what we currently have right now. And even more so that since then we got guaranteed masterwork drops from the stronghold bosses, which we didn't have during the early access period, as well as from the legendary contracts. But I digress. I think I know where most of this frustration comes from, and I will say that it is actually warranted. I'm going to go over my suggestions as well as the most recent news. I'll also preface this by saying that I'm glad I didn't post a rage video yesterday like everybody else did on YouTube. I generally prefer listening to both sides of the story before making an assumption, so I'm glad I actually waited for a developer reply on this topic. Nonetheless, as I was saying earlier, Bioware came in with a very recent reply, and somebody over on Twitter posted, "At Bioware, the community is very torn, confused about endgame drops. I think the thing that is fueling the fire most at the moment is the silence on it, since everyone has been fast to answer anything. Can someone give us a form of 'we are working on it'?" To which Jonathan Warner steps in, and his response was, "We are listening. We want to make sure we give you a great elder game experience, and the live team will try to make considered adjustments." I never said this in the past, but I'm glad we finally have the proper real-world example to give. But it's true that it's good for a developer to be transparent and talk to the fans at every given point, but it's equally worse to be too transparent, which Bioware definitely was. They've made such a habit of answering every single question asked by so many people on their Twitter posts, even more so when those questions were actually answered many times in the past, to the point that even if they take a weekend off, most people will assume that they are going silent, no longer talking to the fans, ending all communications, and so on and so forth. And basically it's all this entire debacle that happened for the past weekend, where people thought that just because Bioware didn't answer some questions for like a few hours over a weekend when most people don't even like go to work, well, you kind of know where the point is going, so I'm not going to go over that. But this was the example I was waiting for, and at some point it was bound to happen. Now, the problem with Anthem's loot, and where most frustration comes from, is the way the whole system is set, and the reasons that I'm about to tell you are why most people are so up in their arms about it. Basically, in a video game there are so many ways in which you can make the loot chase to feel rewarding. You can either provide meaningful loot but at a reduced pace, or the opposite, shower the players with a lot of loot, most of which is of poor quality. For the most part, I think having a generous loot system that bombards players with items is generally good. At the very least, you're not coming empty-handed from your encounters and get to use some of those items. I think that is a good point that Anthem has. The problem is that all of this system is held in place by a series of strings. If one of those strings fall, the entire system falls. In the case of Anthem, it was the masterworks not dropping with that kind of regularity as it did before, which meant the entire system is now seen as broken. Up until a few days ago, you generally saw at least one masterwork item dropping from random chests, and a couple of epic ones as well in the process to make you feel a little bit more important. But now, since the masterwork drops are much less frequent, and even more so now that you're gaining to see white and even blue level items in Grandmaster difficulty, well, I think it's reasonable to say that a lot of this frustration coming from the player base is actually warranted. Add to this the fact that Anthem has a double RNG system, where not only do you have to hope and pray for a good quality item to drop, but also for good stats to be rolled on it, stats we call inscriptions. You have pretty much a recipe for the recent disaster, which is why I wanted to make this comparison comparison. Here's the thing, for a system like Anthem's to feel rewarding and not be frustrating, it has to do both of the things right. It has to both continue to throw multiple items at the players as well as to provide high quality items with some regularity. This is needed to compensate for the lack of guaranteed good stats. Otherwise, you'd be fighting with a double or probably even triple RNG system where you would end up having much better luck at simply playing the lottery than having a full set of items appropriate to your build. This is something that a lot of the games in the ARPG genre did wrong in the past and seems to be moving on from. Most recently we had Diablo 3 with the introduction of its new loot system that removes many of the inconveniences that the players have reported over the past years. It seems that even a game like this, which was completely bashed in the beginning for having probably one of the worst loot systems, while in the beginning days at the very least, seems to have been moving much further away from it. And there are so many other good examples in the genre. For example, we have even Path of the Exile. I know it's kinda different than Anthem, way more different, but it's undeniable that there's a lot of similarities between these games, and of course Anthem already taking a lot of pages from Diablo's book. Both Diablo, but especially Path of Exile, still keeps RNG stats on its items and on its jobs, but it has many more systems you can employ to re-roll on the stats to improve your items and not feel like your entire loot process, your entire loot chase and all of the effort that you have put hasn't gone to waste. Now, a second way in which the loot system could be adjusted, which is also the one Bioware seems to be aiming towards with a very soon future update, we're going to go over that in just a second, is to make stat rolls more appropriate to the type of items they are on. Right now you can get some pretty bad masterwork or even legendary items with sometimes completely useless inscriptions on them. Someone over on Twitter even asked, "Dear Anthem, can you guys please look into the way inscriptions are rolled? Both the weapon and physical bonuses on this legendary apply bonuses to damage that do not apply to itself and are therefore completely useless. Also, getting pistol rolls on Colossus gear makes zero sense," and I do agree that is probably one of the worst legendaries I've seen in the game. Nonetheless, there was a reply for Darren McPherson, I hope I pronounced his name correctly, but he said, "We hear you and making changes to how inscriptions are distributed. First, masterwork and legendary items are much more likely to get rolls that improve them. This is happening very soon. Second, inscription on items are more tailored to that item type. Thank you for the feedback." And he also came in later with some clarifications about some of the terminologies used in many of these inscriptions, and there's a lot of confusion currently generated by a lot of the affixes and the prefixes that you find on certain items, so I'm kinda glad that they are coming in and changing that around a bit. There's a lot of synonym words in the game, but a lot of the stuff could probably be all put under some same general term, if I'm making any sense. I hope I am. But for the most part, expect for this update to come, according to this Twitter post, very soon. So I'm hoping this will happen in the next couple of days. The game really needs some more updates in this regard. Now, of course, further improvements could also be made for some of the more difficult content we have in the game right now to make it a little bit more worth it and, you know, much more special than the regular content. Specifically, I want to mention that in Grandmaster difficulties and even more so in the Strongholds, there's absolutely no reason for chests to drop anything below epic quality. It is perfectly acceptable for them to drop in any quality from the trash mobs, but from the actual chests that you get after defeating very hard encounters, that is not acceptable. Similarly, the current difficulty difference between Grandmaster 1 and the second and of course the third one is not even worth the amount of rewards you'll be getting. You would be spending a lot of hours just to get to the end boss and not have a single proper loot. There's a couple of ways which the community has suggested to improve this, like for example Grandmaster 2 to guarantee unlock 2 masterworks or 2 legendaries instead of 1 as it happens on Grandmaster 1, and additionally Grandmaster 3 to drop 3 masterwork or legendary items from the end boss. So yeah, that is pretty much it. Finally, on the final note that I want to bring is something that many of you guys have asked me in many of the videos. Am I still enjoying Anthem? Well, the answer to that, at least personally, is yes. I am still very much enjoying the game. I've been playing it since the early access, I have a lot of hours in it. Being an old school MMO player, I am kinda used to go weeks to an end without proper item drops, and I actually find the loot system in Anthem to be decently good in terms of rewards. At the very least, I'm not coming empty-handed from whatever dungeon is that I'm doing, even more so now that we have the guaranteed masterwork drops from all of the legendary contracts and the bosses. Also, I didn't benefit from the 10-hour window with the alleged drop buff, simply because I happened to not be up during that time. To be perfectly honest with you guys, my biggest concern right now with the game is the lack of content rather than the loot system. I feel a little bit too restrictive with the fact that there are not enough activities to do. Personally, I would have preferred many more dungeons to be in the game. Currently there's only 3 of them, and even more so, I'm mostly repeating one of them, which is the Tyrant Mine. But this video kind of went a little bit longer than expected. It was meant to be a news piece, but kind of went into an overall opinion from me. Nonetheless, when more stuff gets posted, I'll keep you guys updated. Hopefully it will happen very soon, so I will see you guys next time.